Welcome to the Writer Jerk podcast. I am your host, James Kirst. I am the author of 2 books, Ghosts Are Assholes, published in 2018, and Magic Once Removed, published in 2020. Both books were published by World Castle Publishing, LLC. They are available in several places, including Amazon.com and JamesKirst.com/books, though the links will be provided in the description. I have written approximately 50 short stories, which are also available on JamesKirst.com. If you like any of them or have any constructive criticism, please leave me a comment. My novels mostly focus on paranormal mysteries, urban fantasy, and/or straightforward fantasy, but my short stories tend to gravitate toward horror, slice of life, fantasy, and comedy. Now that the obligatory plugs are out of the way, let's get on with the show. Today I want to talk about Magic Once Removed. Let's start with a synopsis. Down on his luck, former police detective turned private investigator Peter Cunningham thought the beautiful Abigail Mitchell was just another crazy client. Now he's entangled in an ancient conspiracy that dates back to the Salem witch trials, a far cry from the simple assault case the woman wanted him to solve. His budding romance with the witch Abigail will have to be put aside as he travels the Pacific Northwest with a strange friend and former partner Kelly Martinez to discover who these people are and their goals. A coin, a 5-year-old case, the Malleus Maleficarum, televangelist and motivational speaker Tonio Stein, Pope Innocent VIII, and a secret society all tie back to a tragedy from Peter's childhood, and he will need to figure out what it all means and a solution. Though many witches live amongst us, they are also part of a secret society, but their clandestine organization seems to have been discovered, which has led to a new wave of persecution. Internal tensions were already high, and the attacks have only exacerbated the issues. Peter must expose the members of the conspiracy and thwart their nefarious plans before an even bigger tragedy strikes. Magic Once Removed went through a lot of iterations before it reached the rough draft stage, nevertheless the final draft stage. It was initially conceived, I think, about 10 years ago, when I came up with an idea where it would a story about a witch that solved mysteries. Now, I'm arrogant enough to believe that this was born of nothing, but the truth of the matter is that I was probably inspired by the work Fables by Bill Willingham, which is an excellent comic. But even though I think that story would work, and I know that they say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but there's a fine line between imitation and plagiarism, and I think I was crossing the line into plagiarism, which is why I decided to scrap that idea. So then I kind of moved on, and I had tons of ideas that bounced in my head for a while. One was a character who was the son or the nephew of a powerful congressman who put his son or nephew into some department just to give him money to keep him out of the way, and it was like some sort of paranormal department, and the paranormal department was losing funding because they weren't really doing anything, and the nephew or the son basically said, hey, if I solve at least one paranormal mystery, will you keep the department? And I was like, yeah, sure, but there's no paranormal mysteries. And then, the witch girl would walk in and give him a mystery to solve. And, that could have worked, but I couldn't make it work. I kept trying draft after draft, and it just didn't quite work out very well. Another idea that I had was an old embittered PI, around maybe 50, 55 years old, assists a teenage witch. I also had an idea of a magician, I think, from a magician family who learns that his family are witches, and that one of the witch that came in would be like his aunt that he didn't know for a while or had forgotten about, and then together they would solve the mystery, and then he'd find out that his family was witches, and the irony being that even though he's not a witch, or at least he doesn't have the powers of a witch, he was able to solve the mystery without their powers. It was something that could have worked as well, but one of the things was that I was pitching this idea to a class, right? Sort of like a continuing education class with an author who was, she was a published author and everything. And one of the things she suggested was that I would make the titular character and the witch fall in love. And I thought it was a good idea, but an embittered PI around 50 years old falling in love with a teenage girl just doesn't work for obvious reasons. Also, a nephew and an aunt doesn't work for obvious reasons. So I thought, okay, How about instead we have somebody, around 30, 35 years old. Basically the PI idea with the characters sort of meeting in the middle in terms of age. So now the witch is no longer a teenager. She's around the same age as the detective, that sort of thing. One of the lines that I kept from the very beginning when I first wrote my first draft, which was nothing more than like a page or two, as sort of like a synopsis / idea that I want to get to sort of thing, was burning at the stake may have been the end of Joan of Arc, but for me, it was only the beginning. I couldn't incorporate that great into the story, I admit, but I thought it was a humorous line. I thought it kind of worked. One of the things, too, I want to mention is that this story was really long to begin with. The novel was initially 150,000 words, and without my father's help, I would not have been able to reduce it to 100,000 words. So I thank him for helping me make the book as it is today. His help is certainly and sincerely appreciated. Without his support, I would not be where I am today. I would certainly not be a writer without his encouragement. Having said that, reducing the story by 50,000 words is still quite a task, so to do that and still preserve a really creative plot is something of a minor miracle, to say the least. But there are scenes that were cut out, and some of the more elaborate scenes when it comes to the ceremonies of the witches had to be removed because there just wasn't room for it. And it's a little unfortunate because one of the things I want to mention is that I was trying very hard, and maybe I wasn't perfect at this, but I was trying very hard in the story to be respectful towards Wiccans and witchcraft. Much of what I wrote was based on what I researched and learned of modern Wicca and witchcraft in general. I might not have depicted it as accurately as I could have, yet there are just going to be mistakes. Because, I've never lived as a witch. I don't know what it's like to be a witch, or, to be fair, or to be more clear, like in the Wiccan religions. And some of this is coming from online sources, from books, and other things that may not have been accurate, to be fair. It could have been just some person, maybe they weren't even being malicious with their interpretations. They were just trying to depict it to the best of their ability and made mistakes. So we'll see. I don't think any actual practicing witches have read the story, but things like calling the homes of the witches a covenstead and depicting spells more or less how they would be cast, according to the things I read, was all trying in an effort to try to be respectful towards witches, not just trying to make them into like a fairy tale creature. I was trying to keep it within the realms of somewhat realistic. There's a little bit of fantasy. There's definitely a lot of actual magic, but I try to keep it on the rather than the scale of high fantasy to low fantasy, I try to keep it sort of low fantasy, where you could say, well, I can't really see this working, but maybe with a little bit of imagination, it's a little bit more than just Lord of the Rings. Not that I have anything against Lord of the Rings, that just wasn't what I was going for. Although some of the things I did have just kind of made up off the cuff, like the unguent that made people invisible to witches, that was something new, and I have to give credit where credit is due. That was my dad's idea. That was not my idea, and it was primarily done, I believe, to give the antagonist a way of leveling the playing field a bit so that the witches weren't overpowered. And, the idea kind of grew from there. But, the main thing is I wanted to make the witches likable and regular people that are upholding to their traditions, especially when I depicted their traditions. I wanted it to be as accurate as I could with the research I conducted on the subject. So you might be wondering, if you've read the book, so are the witches symbolic of a certain group or certain society? And the truth of the matter is that, yes, they are obviously analogous to any group that has gotten the short end of the stick by society. And feel free to insert anyone you want from any time in any country, anywhere in the world. Because to be honest, I did not think of one specifically when I wrote the story. So if you are thinking the witches are obviously representative of X or Y at this time, at this place, I guess my answer would be kind of more or less yes and no, you're right and wrong, because I was not thinking of anything specific when I wrote the tale. And speaking of things or people that I was thinking of while I was writing the story, Tony O'Stein is based loosely on Tony Robbins and Joel Osteen. Honestly, though, outside of their bombastic personality and feel-good kind of speeches or sermons, as opposed to faith-based sermons, although I don't know much about Tony Robbins. I don't know if he's actually, supposed to be a preacher at all. So I think he's just more of a motivational speaker, and Joel Osteen is the one who tries to tie it into faith. But after a while, he became his own character, and it wasn't supposed to be a direct comparison at the end, just sort of an illusion, but not supposed to be a parody of the character. As far as I know, and I don't know them personally, so maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't believe either have murdered anyone. I don't believe they have homicidal urges towards witches. I think, whatever you feel about them, they're not some sort of sadistic, evil masterminds, to the degree, at least, that they would actually kill people. I could be wrong, but that's kind of how I'm feeling with them. So what about the conspiracy? That was kind of added somewhat, I would say, in the middle of the writing process. I needed a mystery for my main character, Peter, to solve, and I needed a reason why a bunch of guys would attack a witch for no real reason. It's at least seemingly at first, obviously. There was an actual reason towards the, you'd find out actually fairly early in the book, but, it ties into a larger plot. And basically, it was just through research of, why the history of witches and, witchcraft and how the Europeans in the Catholic Church treated witchcraft and witches and that sort of thing, And then when I read about The Hammer of Witches, the book that depicted what to do with witches, how to discover witches, that sort of thing, and then with the ambiguous quote by Pope Innocent VIII, it just all came together into a cohesive plot. I embellished it a little bit. There are no ties from Pope Innocent and the Hammer of Witches and the people who wrote that story to a cult or the Salem witch trials. But otherwise, what I wrote was, was historically accurate to a point. I don't think there were any, as far as I know, European witch hunting cults or anybody in Europe that had ties to Salem outside of obviously the people of Salem, and the people who lived there had ties to Europe in terms of their ancestry, or I guess ancestry is a little bit much because they weren't even there for that long at that point. But you get the idea. Salem was sort of a separate city at that point. I thought it was kind of neat to try to tie it all together like that. One of the other things that I want to mention is that every chapter, but the first and last, starts with a quote from one of the characters, and the first chapter and the last chapter are the exceptions to that. Another way I'm trying to bookend. I'm not doing that every story, but when I can get away with it, I like to do the bookends. That's one of my favorite things to do in a story. One of the scenes in the book was inspired by the lesser-known game Murdered Soul Suspect, which is one of my favorite games, even though I would say, technically speaking, it's not a good game. I thought the story was all right. I thought the story was really good, but the gameplay was severely lacking. But, it's a game about witches and ghosts. What's there not to love from my perspective? My first two stories are about a ghost and witches. Obviously, I'm going to love the game. Anyway, there are some scenes that were in the game that I use as inspiration. Now, in this case, I didn't take them. Like I said, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so I made sure not to cross over into the line of plagiarism. But, yeah, definitely there was some inspiration there. And the point is, you never know where the inspiration will come up from. So if nothing else, keep an open mind, and I hope you find some inspiration in your life. And so that's all I have to say about Magic Once Removed for now. If I have a co-host or if there's any interest in learning more about the story and the behind-the-scenes look, please let me know. Please leave a comment if you enjoyed and like. If you didn't enjoy, I changed my mind. Don't, leave a like and don't comment. All right, I'm kidding. Leave a comment, but tell me what you didn't enjoy. And until next time, this has been James Kurst, the Writer Jerk. Now signing off. Halloween is rapidly approaching, and what better way to celebrate the season of ghosts and witches than buying my books, Ghosts Are Assholes and Magic Once Removed, available on Kindle and paperback, on Amazon, the Barnes & Noble website, and a boatload of other places. The links will be provided in the description. If horror is your thing, go to the horror page on jameskurst.com for a plethora of horror short stories, including the Fang series. If horror isn't your thing, still go to the jameskurst.com site as well, as I've written a variety of other types of short stories. Also, if you don't like horror, don't let it dissuade you from picking up one of my novels. Ghosts Are Assholes and Magic Once Removed aren't really horror, even though they star traditional horror villains, albeit in much different roles than they are traditionally depicted. They are more mysteries and adventure tales with supernatural elements. Please pick up both today. Thanks for listening. Please like, share, and comment, both here and the jameskurst.com page if you've enjoyed. Talk to you soon.